This is an excerpt from my book, Spirit+boy+an+earth+spy. It has a lot to do with what we were just talking about in this morning's episode in regard to our meditative state, our daydreaming state. So I'll just pick this up right from chapter 15 on page 104 if you have reference to this book. The chapter is called Living in Different Dimensions. Henry's mind had been in a different state most of the morning. He had been drifting in and out of this daydreaming. To Mrs. Johnson it looked like he was blankly gazing out the window. His virtual reality had him imitating himself as being a professional ball player on the basketball court. He was shooting one perfect goal after another. Every one of his balls landed inside the hoop. In his mind's eye, he was the best. It was a huge life enhancer seeing himself in this perfect state of doing what he loved doing. That was until Mrs. Johnson, being her normal bossy self, caught him spaced out and screamed, "You have been warned before. Stop staring out the window. You're off in the clouds again, aren't you? Daydreaming." Her actions were so abrupt that Mary couldn't control her emotions and burst into tears. Henry's re-entry into his body was one of pure shock, too. It caused him literally to jump and make his heart skip a beat. I moved through his being and left him with a special message. Daydreaming is where all the great inventors got their inspiration, their visions. Creative imagination is triggered in this wonderful state, elevated state called daydreaming. Daydreaming, Mrs. Johnson, that's where all the visions and inventions came from and stuff like inspirations, he said out loud, half joking and half serious. Making a comment like this made some of his classmates laugh, and Mrs. Johnson even madder. "I beg your pardon. I've heard enough of you and your nonsense." I whispered again so Henry could back up his theory. Great inventors, musicians, artists, writers, and even people like Einstein and Edison use these methods. They channeled information. People like this often say things like, "It just came to me. The idea just popped into my head." They were quiet enough to hear their own thoughts. Henry quoted the rest of my information perfectly. It was Einstein who once said, "Imagination is more important than knowledge. Knowledge is limited. Imagination encircles the world." Henry continued to taunt her. "Me too. I was just letting my imagination flow, developing my intuition." I wanted to tell him, Buddha once said, "All that we are is a result of what we have thought." Daydreaming opens the floodgates to the river of thoughts that flow directly into your mind's eye. But Mrs. Johnson didn't get it. She screamed, "Don't you ever answer me back, boy, or you'll be visiting the principal's office." There was no stopping Henry now. Daydreaming is a wonderful state to be in. It's good to lose yourself sometimes in this magical state. You should try it. She was livid. "That's it. You're out of here." Henry stood up and in his calm voice quoted Khalil Gibran. "You can house my body but not my mind, 'cause that lives in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams." He noticed Mary mouthing the words to herself too. It was like a new Henry had emerged. He was quoting the great master Khalil Gibran like he was the great master himself. He knew the power and the meaning behind his words and what they meant. Some of the class were amazed at first. Others didn't know what to think. Some even laughed until they were silent by Mrs. Milliton's militant expression and that slap of the ruler on Henry's desk again. "What on earth are you talking about, you naughty little boy?" He stuttered at first. Philosophy. It's from a book called The Prophet." "That's it. I've had enough. You're off to the principal's office immediately. Philosophy. You're a rude little boy, quoting philosophy to me, your teacher." She said it like she didn't need to learn anything new in her life, that teachers teach and students learn. She had that all wrong. Some say when the teacher is ready, the student will appear, and some say when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. There's no rule on earth that says that one learns only from teachers and that teachers are so perfect that they can't learn new tricks and knowledge from their students. But like always, Mrs. Johnson went on and on about Henry's behavior while she scribbled her note in her customary fashion and shoved it in Henry's sweaty hand. He was glad to be out of her space. We wandered slowly down the corridor. Half of him was thinking about how much trouble he was going to be in, and the other half, underneath the fear, he was glad to be away from the lady he called a moron more than once in his head for this very reason. She was always on the attack. Miss Bennet read the note and roared with laughter. "You said you were daydreaming, developing your intuition like Einstein? That's the funniest thing I've ever heard." "Miss Bennet, it's true. That's where all the great visions and he suddenly couldn't remember how to say it, so he quickly said, "ideas come from." "Do you think we should have a class just for daydreaming?" she joked back. Henry was elated. "That would be so cool. You mean we could just sit there doing nothing?" "Well, they call that meditating, and I'm sure the school board wouldn't approve, but it sure would take a lot of stress out of some of the people that we know." Henry knew who she was talking about and agreed with a beaming nod. I decided to move through Henry. He heard my high-pitched siren, the one that nobody else hears. He knew it was me and paid attention to receiving my words of encouragement. Intuition is a gift from Spirit. Some of you feel it in your head, some of it in your heart, and others in your gut. What schools need to teach children is how to use this sixth sense, how to recognize this vibrational frequency and recognize when you're off your station. It's just like tuning into the right radio station. This knowledge will give you the ability to receive the answers to all your questions. Imagine how great that would be if you were having a test and you received your answers just by quietening your mind and staying in the zone. Henry spoke with a different level of awareness, like a wise old soul remembering lifetimes. Meditation allows you to get in touch with ourselves. We're all so busy rushing around on the outside that we really don't sit still long enough to listen to our inner being, to listen to that little voice inside our heads. "You ever heard it, Miss Bennet? You ever heard a message in voices?" She was stunned, speechless. "Henry, that's a very profound thing to say. You sound so much older, so much wiser than most of the kids I know your age. And yes, sometimes I get it's more like a feeling. Is that what it's about?" I moved through him again, and he quoted me perfectly. "Inside, Mrs. Bennet. We all have it in us. We just have to learn to trust it, to trust our intuition. It's always going to tell you what's right and wrong. It's your built-in guidance system that you were born with. Look at animals. They didn't learn where to live and what to eat. They just know. That guidance system is the most valuable sense we have, and it's the one sense hardly any of us use. How dumb is that? They don't even teach us how to use it in schools." And that's all I'm going to read about that right now. That was from Spirit+boy+an+earth+spy. It's a little friendly story of two boys who meet a spirit guide who teaches them the wonderful wisdom within a dramatic novel. I hope that you enjoyed this, and I will read some more another time.